We live in paradoxical times. What was once considered natural for a human being, honesty, kindness, respect for others, now increasingly appears strange, almost suspicious. Being honest is called naive. Showing kindness is seen as weakness. Living by conscience means preparing for ridicule. The world seems to have gone mad, turning values upside down. Where strength was once admired, now people see foolishness. Where dignity was once praised, now profit and cynicism are preferred. But the question arises, has the world truly gone mad? Or have we simply stopped seeing the obvious? The Stoics claimed, goodness is not an anomaly. It is the very nature of humanity. We are made for reason, justice, and mutual respect. Everything else is distortion, born of fear, greed, and passion. The problem is not that goodness is unnatural, but that society has grown accustomed to living in captivity to illusions. In such a culture, normal human qualities begin to look like exceptions. Today's reality shows the aggressive, assertive person gets applause. The cynical one earns respect. And the one who tries to live by conscience is often left behind. But does that mean virtue has lost its meaning? Stoic wisdom says no. True strength lies not in adapting to chaos, but in maintaining clarity and firmness in any situation. Seneca wrote, "A man who follows the crowd will never live differently. He will live poorly, but in the same way as everyone else." These words sound like a challenge. If the world sees goodness as an anomaly, that's no reason to give up. It's a reason to remember that goodness is what makes us human. In moments of collective madness, it becomes especially important to remain steadfast. When cynicism becomes the norm, a simple act of honesty already requires courage. When most choose personal gain, preserving dignity becomes a feat. And this is where the essence of Stoic philosophy is revealed. To live not as the crowd dictates, but as reason and virtue command. This video is an invitation to look at the world through the lens of Stoicism. We'll explore why society sees goodness as an anomaly, how illusions and fears shape our attitude toward virtue, and why today it is more important than ever not to surrender to this chaos. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "To live virtuously is the only thing always within our power." Why has goodness become the exception? Look closely at the modern world and you'll see a strange picture. Honesty is perceived as weakness, compassion arouses suspicion, and the desire to live by conscience is often mocked. The world seems to have flipped its mirrors. What was once called light is now called darkness. What was once strength is now called naivete. But why? Why has goodness become rare? And why is it seen as an anomaly, as something alien to human nature? The Stoics knew the answer. They claimed that man is made for virtue, for reason and justice, and all deviations from this arise from slavery to passions and illusions. This slavery is exactly what we see in modern society. When we look at culture, we notice its painful emphasis. The cult of profit and success at any cost, the glorification of aggression, the thirst for recognition, the race for pleasure, all of this has become the new norm. A person who chooses the path of calm, moderation, and dignity is now considered strange. On social media, aggressive and cynical comments attract more attention than words of support. In business, harshness and ruthlessness are seen as professionalism, while honesty and fairness are viewed as weakness. Even in everyday relationships, people often fear showing sincerity, lest they be rejected or mocked. We live in a world where virtue has become rare, not because it has disappeared, but because people have stopped seeing it as a value. The Stoics saw this as the root of all misfortune. Epictetus said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." When society begins to value cynicism and gain over justice and reason, people distort their nature. They begin to believe that kindness is weakness, generosity is foolishness, honesty is naivete. But all of this is not a reflection of reality, only a distorted judgment reinforced by the crowd. Stoic philosophy teaches, truth does not change just because the majority thinks otherwise. Goodness does not cease to be good, even if it is called weakness. Think, why is it harder today to be kind than to be cruel? Because cruelty flows with the current of passions, anger, fear, greed. Virtue, on the other hand, requires effort, reason, and courage. The world follows the path of least resistance, and so those who choose reason and virtue appear to be anomalies. But this is precisely where their true strength lies. Seneca wrote, "The crowd is the worst teacher. If the crowd laughs at honesty, that doesn't mean honesty has lost its value. It means the crowd has forgotten who it is." Man by nature is made for mutual respect, for reason, for cooperation. When we live against this nature, we begin to destroy ourselves and others. In today's world, the workings of this false logic are especially clear. An honest employee often loses career opportunities to someone who acts with cunning. A person who chooses kindness seems defeated next to one who knows how to manipulate. But the question is, do they truly win? The Stoics would say, no, because true victory is victory over oneself. It is the preservation of calm and dignity. It is living in harmony with the nature of reason. Everything else is just external toys, here today and gone tomorrow. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, a man's worth is determined by what he strives for. If your goal is profit at any cost, you devalue yourself because you make your happiness dependent on what does not belong to you. If your goal is virtue, you become free because your reason and your actions are always within your power. But why then is virtue seen as an anomaly? Because most people live in the illusion of control and in slavery to passions. They think happiness depends on the external: money, status, praise. When someone shows that it's possible to be happy without all that, to live calmly and with dignity even in hardship, they become an outsider. The crowd does not like those who shatter its illusions. Thus, virtue becomes an anomaly, not because it is contrary to nature, but because it is contrary to the habits of the crowd. But the Stoics taught, the crowd does not define truth. Epictetus told his students, if you want to live virtuously, prepare to be considered insane. These words sound both like a warning and a challenge. Yes, the world will see the honest, kind, and just person as strange. But this is precisely the path of the philosopher, to go against the madness of the majority, preserving clarity and firmness. Think about what we call success. We applaud those who achieve wealth or power, but often turn a blind eye to the price paid. If a person sacrifices conscience for gain, the world may admire them, but the Stoic sees defeat, because they have lost the most important thing, harmony with themselves. Seneca said, not he who has little is poor, but he who desires more. The world considers greed, envy, and the race for more as normal, and in this norm, virtue looks like an exception. But in reality, it is the true nature of man. Everything else is a sickness of the soul. Today, it is especially important to remind ourselves, the world may have gone mad, but that doesn't mean you must go mad with it. You have a choice. Live like the crowd or live by reason. Yes, virtue doesn't attract applause. It doesn't bring likes or recognition, but it brings what the crowd will never know: peace, clarity, and inner freedom. When everyone around is infected by passions, virtue becomes not just good, it becomes a challenge. And it is this challenge that defines human strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Virtue is what makes a man a man. If we abandon it for the crowd's approval, we lose ourselves." Goodness became an exception only because people forgot who they are. But Stoic philosophy reminds us, to be virtuous is not an anomaly, it is a return to our true nature. Everything else is an escape from oneself. And when the world calls your honesty naive, your kindness weakness, your resilience strangeness, remember, this is not your anomaly, it is their illness. You are not against the world, you are for your nature. And in that lies your strength. The Stoic nature of virtue is not abstraction or moral dogma. It is the core of human existence, what makes a person human. Everything else, wealth, power, fame, recognition, are mere decorations that come and go easily. But virtue, as the Stoics taught, is eternal, because it is within our power and depends only on us. When the world sees kindness as weakness and honesty as naivete, Stoic thought reminds us, this is not weakness, but the only true strength. Epictetus taught to distinguish between what is within our power and what is not. Our judgments, our thoughts, our actions, these are what we can control. Everything else, body, wealth, reputation, success, depends on the external. And it is here that the concept of virtue is born. Virtue is the proper use of what is within our power. It is the ability to think clearly, act justly, choose reason over passion, resilience over fear, moderation over excess. This is the essence of human nature. This is our true freedom. The world, however, strives for the opposite. Most people seek happiness in the external, in what is beyond their control. They want more money, more recognition, more pleasures, and when someone shows that happiness is possible without all that, that happiness is born from within, in harmony with reason, it irritates them, because it shatters their familiar illusion. That's why virtue seems like an anomaly, because it doesn't fit the crowd's value system. But for the Stoic, it is the only true wealth. Seneca wrote, "Virtue alone is sufficient for a happy life." These words sound radical even today. We are used to linking happiness with comfort, convenience, success. But the Stoic says, all of that is secondary. You can be happy even if deprived of the external, if you preserve virtue. And conversely, you can possess all the riches of the world and still be unhappy if you lose clarity of reason and inner freedom. Why is that? Because all external things are not within our power. You can lose money in a day, health can fail, fame disappears faster than it came. But if your joy is based on virtue, it cannot be taken away. No one can force you to stop thinking clearly, acting justly, being courageous and moderate, unless you yourself abandon it. Virtue is what makes you invincible. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "If an action accords with nature and reason, then it is worthy of you." For the Stoic, nature is not forests and mountains, but the rational structure of man. To live in harmony with nature means to live according to reason, and reason tells us virtue is our true path. When you are honest, just, moderate, and courageous, you live in harmony with your nature. When you choose lies, greed, fear, and excess, you abandon yourself. The world may applaud your success, but internally you are falling apart. And this destruction cannot be hidden by wealth or fame. The Stoics knew that virtue requires effort. It does not come on its own, it is formed through practice. It is constant self-observation, the ability to notice your judgments, to test them with reason rather than passion. It is the habit of choosing what is right even when what is wrong seems easier and more profitable. Virtue is labor, but it is this labor that gives life meaning. Without it, life becomes a chase after shadows. Think about how honesty is perceived today. A person who speaks the truth is often called too blunt, too naive, too not of this world. But the Stoic will say, if you fear speaking the truth for the crowd's approval, you are already a slave to its opinions. Only the one who does not hide reason for gain is truly free. Or take kindness. Here is the English translation of your text, preserving the original structure and flow without paragraph breaks. In modern society, it is often mistaken for weakness, but the Stoics made distinctions. To be kind does not mean to be spineless. On the contrary, kindness requires courage. Anger and aggression are the easy path, the submission to passions. But kindness is a conscious choice, the strength of reason that restrains you from destroying yourself and others. Courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. These are the four pillars of Stoic virtue. They are not random traits. They are the structure that forms a person. Wisdom teaches us to see things as they are, not as passions paint them. Justice demands respect for others and the ability to act with conscience. Courage gives strength to face difficulties without hiding or giving up. Temperance keeps us from excess, teaches us to be content with what is necessary and not to destroy ourselves with indulgence. These four virtues make a person whole. Without them, he falls apart. But the world obsessed with passions sees this as a threat. The crowd finds it inconvenient for a person to be free, wise, and just. It prefers when a person submits to desires, chases pleasure, and fears loss. That's why virtue seems strange. But the Stoics remind us, it is precisely virtue that makes us human. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, he wasn't trying to impress. He wasn't seeking praise. He wrote to remind himself each day is an opportunity to live virtuously. He was an emperor, but he understood that power and fame are temporary, while virtue is eternal. His writings still sound alive because they are addressed not to the crowd, but to the human essence. Epictetus, though a slave, was freer than many masters, because his mind remained beyond chains. He knew a master could command his body, but not his thoughts. That's where true virtue reveals itself, in the ability to preserve freedom even when outwardly bound. Seneca, exiled and surrounded by danger, spoke of the same. Life is long for those who know how to use it. For him, to use life meant to live in virtue, not to postpone it. All three, so different in fate, agreed on one thing. Only virtue makes life complete. It's important to understand, virtue is not an ornament of life, but its foundation. Without it, wealth is emptiness, fame is illusion, power is tyranny. With virtue, even poverty becomes light, exile bearable, illness a trial but not a catastrophe. Virtue turns any circumstance into a field for reason. That is its strength. That's why the Stoics weren't afraid that the world sees goodness as an anomaly. They knew the world may be mistaken, but the nature of reason is not. To be virtuous is to be in harmony with the universe. Let the crowd laugh. Let it call kindness weakness, honesty naivete, justice foolishness. All of that is its sickness, not truth. The truth is that only virtue gives freedom and inner strength. If you possess it, no one can take away the most important thing, yourself. Virtue is your fortress, your light, your law. It does not depend on time, society, or circumstances. It depends only on your choice. That's why the Stoics said, no force in the world can deprive a person of virtue except himself. And if today the world sees goodness as an anomaly, it only means that even more resilience is needed, even more clarity. Not to change the crowd, but to preserve oneself. Why does the world reject virtue? At first glance, the answer is simple. Because the world is built in such a way that most are driven by passions. Human nature gravitates toward pleasure, comfort, power, and recognition, and all of this looks more attractive than a quiet and restrained life in virtue. But the Stoics saw deeper. They understood that the world does not reject virtue because it is meaningless or useless, but because it too clearly exposes the inner emptiness of most people. A person who lives reasonably, calmly, and justly becomes a mirror for the crowd, and in that mirror the crowd sees its own weakness. That's why virtue seems threatening. The crowd prefers to be deceived, prefers to believe that happiness lies in accumulating wealth, in luxury, in others' approval. And when someone by example shows that none of this is needed for happiness, the crowd becomes irritated. It feels exposed. That's why the world often mocks virtue, calls it naivete or even madness. But in reality, madness is the rejection of reason, life in constant pursuit of what is not in our power. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." But the crowd believes that happiness depends on the amount of money, pleasures, and recognition. Two value systems collide, and so virtue seems strange, like an anomaly. But this is only a sign of how far people have strayed from their nature. The Stoics claimed, to live in accordance with nature means to live reasonably. Reason tells us to value the internal above the external. The crowd lives the opposite way, and so anyone who goes against it provokes resistance. Why is it hardest for a person to accept the simple idea that happiness lies in what is within his power? Because it requires responsibility. It's easier to blame circumstances, other people, fate, than to admit your thoughts and actions are your responsibility. Virtue requires courage to look at yourself and say, everything I do is born within me, and no one but me is responsible for it. Most prefer to hide behind the crowd, behind habits, behind excuses. That's why virtue is frightening. It demands maturity, and maturity is hard. Epictetus taught, it's not things that disturb us, but our opinions about things. But for the crowd, this idea is too uncomfortable. To accept it means to give up endless complaints and accusations, and complaints are too sweet for a weak spirit. People prefer to live in the illusion that their unhappiness is caused by something external rather than admit that the source is within. That's why virtue is rejected. In today's world, this is especially evident. A person who refuses to join the race for status is called strange. One who is content with little is seen as lazy or lacking ambition. Honesty is interpreted as impracticality, kindness as weakness, temperance as lack of taste for life. The world has grown used to confusing noise with value, luxury with dignity, aggression with strength. And anyone who chooses the opposite causes bewilderment. But the Stoic knows, all of this is just proof that society has lost its way. Seneca said, "He who follows the crowd will never go further than the crowd." And if the crowd rejects virtue, it is only because it is not ready for truth. But why do kindness, honesty, and justice irritate the world so much? Because they expose lies. A kind person shows that it's possible to live without malice and hatred. An honest person shows that it's possible to speak the truth even when it's not profitable. A just person shows that it's possible to act rightly even when it's easier to act otherwise. These examples seem to challenge everyone who lives for gain and remind them of their own compromises. The crowd does not like reminders of its own cowardice. That's why it mocks virtue. In this sense, the Stoic life is a life against the current dot. Here is the English translation of your text, preserving the original flow and tone. It demands strength because you constantly face resistance from the external world. But the Stoic knows. Value lies not in the crowd's approval, but in harmony with oneself. What the crowd calls madness, reason calls virtue. What the crowd sees as weakness is, in fact, true strength. What the crowd despises is what truly makes a person free. So why does virtue seem like an anomaly? Because it is rare. People who live in accordance with it stand out against the backdrop of general chaos. Their calm in the midst of disorder looks suspicious. Their honesty among lies seems strange. Their resilience amid fear is unsettling. But this is not anomaly. It is authenticity. The real anomaly is the crowd, living in perpetual illusion and chasing shadows. The Stoics understood the majority will always oppose reason, but they also knew the value of life is not measured by how many approve of your path. It is measured by the degree of harmony with nature and reason. Epictetus said, "If you want progress, be content to be thought foolish." These words are a reminder that the world will always see virtue as something absurd. But for the one who chooses reason, there is no greater happiness than being in agreement with oneself. That's why the Stoic does not fear rejection by the world. He understands that the world may be mistaken, but reason is not. Ultimately, the question is not whether society accepts virtue, but whether you yourself are capable of accepting it. Are you capable of being honest when surrounded by lies? Kind when surrounded by malice? Just when injustice is more profitable? That is the true test of a person. The crowd will always choose the easy path. The Stoic chooses the difficult one because it is what makes him human. Virtue is not an ornament or a passing whim. It is our nature. And if we abandon it for the crowd, we lose ourselves. The world rejects virtue because it fears truth. But the Stoic knows truth does not depend on the majority. It depends on reason, and reason is always with you, if you are willing to listen. Why is virtue needed now more than ever? Because the world we've built is filled with unprecedented noise, temptations, and illusions. In ancient times, people were threatened mainly by natural disasters, wars, and disease. Today, the modern person is torn apart by information streams, constant comparisons, the thirst for attention, and endless stimuli pushing them to live outside themselves. The 21st century human is surrounded by a wealth of opportunities, but this wealth often becomes a source of chaos and anxiety. One can be in 1,000 places at once through a screen, but rarely is present with oneself here and now. That's why virtue today is an anchor. Without it, it's easy to become a toy of circumstance. The Stoics taught, the most important thing is to distinguish what is within our power and what is not. But in the modern world, this distinction is fading. Social media convinces us we can control the image others see. News feeds urge us to react instantly to everything. Advertising tells us happiness is one purchase away. People believe they control the external, but increasingly lose control over the internal. And this is where virtue gains new meaning. It brings us back to simplicity, clarity, and the understanding that happiness depends on us, not on algorithms or others' opinions. Today, temperance is especially important. The world tempts us with endless consumption. Buy more, watch more, live faster. But the Stoic understands, the more you seek outside, the less remains within. Temperance doesn't make life poor, it makes it clear. A person who can be content with little becomes free from the dictatorship of marketing and comparison. Even more vital today is the virtue of courage. The world has become soft in some ways and harsh in others, soft in temptations and pleasures, harsh in judgment and competition. To be honest, to remain yourself, to go against the current, all this requires more courage than ever. The crowd mocks kindness, business exploits greed, politics plays on fear, and anyone who wants to remain a person of reason must show daily resilience not to be pulled into this whirlwind. Justice also carries a special weight in our age. When the whole world is instantly connected, injustice in one place becomes visible to all. But along with this, the very image of justice becomes distorted. Everyone sees themselves as a judge. Everyone rushes to condemn. Everyone hands out labels. In such a world, true justice is not a shout in the crowd, but a calm and honest assessment of what is right. It is the ability to see not only others' mistakes, but your own. It is the skill to act for the common good, not for likes and approval. And this is where Stoic justice becomes an antidote to digital mob rule. But above all, wisdom is needed today. Never before has humanity had such access to knowledge, and never before has it been so far from truth. Information is not wisdom. The crowd drowns in facts, numbers, and opinions, but rarely asks the main question: what among this is truly within my power, and what leads to virtue? Wisdom is the filter that allows us to cut away the excess, not chase every headline, not succumb to every fear. The Stoic understands, knowledge that doesn't lead to a better life is just noise. In this sense, virtue today is an act of resistance. Resistance to a culture of superficiality, haste, and constant comparison. To be honest in an age of cynicism is already courage. To be temperate in an age of consumption is already freedom. To be just in an age of labeling is already strength. To be wise in an age of informational chaos is already salvation. And all this together makes life meaningful. But there is another aspect. In today's world, virtue is no longer expected. If in the past, philosophers or sages were expected to show resilience and honesty, today people are expected to be efficient, productive, and profitable. That's why virtue is not just rare. It looks strange. But it is precisely this strangeness that makes it precious. It sets a person apart, gives them inner autonomy, and makes them an example for others. The Stoic does not live to impress, but his life impresses by itself, because it goes against convention. Why is virtue especially needed today? Because without it, a person becomes part of a system that uses their desires against them. Without temperance, they become a slave to consumption. Without courage, a victim of the crowd. Without justice, a participant in injustice. Without wisdom, a prisoner of chaos. Virtue is not a luxury of philosophy, it is a survival tool for the soul. Today, when we are surrounded by endless noise, the ability to preserve silence within is true strength. When everyone runs after new things, the ability to value what already exists is true freedom. When everyone shouts and condemns, the ability to be silent and understand is true justice. When everyone drowns in news, the ability to discern what matters is true wisdom. That's why Stoic virtue has not become outdated. It has become even more relevant. It reminds us that we are not obliged to follow the crowd. We are not obliged to live as dictated by advertising or fashion. Here is the English translation of your text, preserving its philosophical tone, rhythm, and structure. We can live reasonably, calmly, and freely if we accept a simple truth. Everything truly valuable is within our power, and everything else is illusion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "No one can take your mind from you unless you give it away." These words today sound like a manifesto, because it is reason, fortified by virtue, that protects us from what makes the world insane. The answer is simple. Virtue is needed now more than ever, because without it, we dissolve into chaos. It makes us human in the fullest sense. It makes peace possible amid the storm, clarity amid the noise, freedom amid illusions. And the one who lives stoically today is not merely following an ancient philosophy. He is resisting the madness of the world and preserving his humanity. The world today is full of cynicism, and it has almost become its norm. To be skeptical, mocking, and contemptuous of sincerity and kindness is considered a sign of intelligence. People compete in sarcasm, take pride in their distrust, and label as naive those who still believe, love, and help. But this is precisely where madness reveals itself. What should be natural and noble is now seen as weakness or even foolishness. The Stoics knew that the crowd often errs, and that the opinion of the majority rarely aligns with truth. They taught not to follow the crowd, but to walk one's own path, strengthened by reason and virtue. Cynicism destroys the inner world of a person because it robs them of the ability to rejoice and to trust. It creates the illusion of strength, but in reality makes the soul weak. The one who distances himself from everything, who mocks and despises, is actually afraid of being vulnerable. Stoic wisdom points to another path. Not to flee pain through cynicism, but to face it directly and transform it into strength. When a person chooses to live by virtue, he does not hide behind sarcasm. He acts openly, calmly, and honestly. His strength lies not in contempt, but in the ability to remain kind and just, even where it seems strange. In today's world, this is especially acute. Try to be sincere, and you'll be called weak. Try to help, and you'll be accused of hidden motives. Try to forgive, and you'll be deemed foolish. But the Stoic understands. These judgments belong to others, not to him. He discerns what depends on him, his intentions, his actions, his judgments. Everything else is noise from the external world. And if the crowd sees kindness as weakness, that does not diminish the value of kindness itself. Seneca wrote that people mock philosophy not because it is laughable, but because they fear its power. The one who mocks virtue is, in truth, feeling vulnerable before its truth. And here lies Stoic resilience, not allowing others' contempt to strip away one's reason and inner light. The crowd's cynicism is often fueled by fear. People fear being deceived, fear that their kindness will be exploited, fear that the world will see them as weak. And instead of strengthening themselves, they choose a simple defense, rejecting everything through mockery. But the Stoic goes further. He is not afraid to appear naive, because his strength lies not in what others think, but in his own reason and will. His virtue is armor that does not allow cynicism to penetrate within. He can live in a world where sincerity seems anomalous, yet remain true to himself, because he knows true dignity does not depend on others' judgments. The courage of the Stoic is revealed in not succumbing to collective contempt. And this courage is harder than it seems. It's easy to blend into the crowd, easy to smirk with others, easy to hide behind a biting word. But the Stoic chooses another path. He is not afraid to be the odd one out. For him, it is more important to keep the soul calm and pure than to win approval through cynicism. He understands that the crowd often laughs at what it cannot comprehend, and thus contempt for kindness only confirms its value. For if it were worthless, it would not be feared or mocked. Stoic philosophy also helps to cope with resentment, which often breeds cynicism. When a person repeatedly encounters injustice, when their trust is betrayed, they tend to harden. But the Stoic reminds himself, others' actions are not within his power. What is within his power is only his own response. He can harden and become part of the general contempt, or he can strengthen himself by preserving clarity and inner freedom. He chooses the latter. In this choice, true strength is born, not allowing others' mistakes to destroy one's own soul. Cynicism may seem like an easy escape, but in reality, it is a form of slavery. A person becomes a slave to fear, distrust, and anger. He hides it behind irony, but inside his heart is full of anxiety. The Stoic remains free. He accepts that the world is imperfect, but he does not allow the world to dictate who he should be. He chooses virtue, even if it seems strange in the eyes of others. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person should be like a rock against which the waves break. In the modern world, that rock is resilience against cynicism and contempt. The waves will strike again and again, but the person fortified by reason remains unchanged. He does not respond to contempt with contempt. He responds with calm. His life becomes testimony that virtue is not only possible, but stronger than any mockery. Thus, Stoic virtue becomes an antidote to cynicism. It reminds us, strength is not in mockery, but in the ability to remain honest and kind. Freedom is not in contempt, but in independence from others' judgments. Wisdom is not in skepticism, but in clarity that allows us to distinguish what matters from what is empty. Today, this is especially important because cynicism permeates everything: culture, politics, everyday conversation. And precisely because of this, living by Stoic principles becomes both a challenge and an example. It shows that it is possible to be calm and clear in a world ruled by mockery. It proves that virtue is stronger than contempt, and everyone who chooses this path becomes a living reminder. The world may laugh, the world may see goodness as an anomaly, but true strength always lies in remaining a person of reason and virtue. In a world that seems to have gone mad, with its constant rush, noise, race for status and wealth, it is hard to remain virtuous. It seems that honesty, patience, gentleness, and justice are seen as weakness, naivete, or even as flaws. But the Stoics show us another way. They demonstrate that it is possible to preserve inner virtue even when the outer world is immersed in chaos, and that it is precisely in such conditions that true human strength is revealed. Epictetus, a slave, lived surrounded by restrictions, violence, and injustice, yet his mind remained free. His letters and teachings show that strength lies not in controlling the external, but in the ability to govern oneself, to maintain calm, reason, and moral resilience regardless of circumstances. Epictetus taught to distinguish what is within our power and what is not. The world around him could be unjust, cruel, or cynical, but within him virtue was born, harmony with nature and the Logos. He showed that external conditions cannot deprive a person of dignity if he preserves inner discipline, awareness, and loyalty to reason. Seneca, exiled to Tarentum, lived among people who saw success only in wealth and influence, but he found joy in simple things, in reflection, in friendship, in philosophy. He taught that inner peace and moral purity are more valuable than all external goods. His letters are full of reflections on how to preserve humanity, dignity, and virtue when society seeks to subject reason to passions, ambitions, and fears. Seneca demonstrated that even in exile, a person can be happy and free if he remains true to himself and his inner nature. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, commander of armies, ruler of a vast empire, was surrounded by intrigue, political pressure, and war. He saw how people pursued power, profit, and fame at any cost, and how virtue was seen as weakness. But he did not succumb to this pressure. His meditations are a diary of inner guidance, a journal where he daily reminded himself of the value of reason, justice, temperance, and courage. Even in war, facing death and cruelty, he preserved inner silence, inner harmony with nature and the Logos, the ability to see what is right and act virtuously. These examples show that virtue does not depend on the external world. It does not become weakness if the world sees it as strange. On the contrary, virtue in chaos reveals strength, courage, and resilience. The Stoics show that true freedom is the freedom of the inner world, the freedom to remain loyal to reason and virtue even when external circumstances are far from ideal. In a world where many are guided by fear, greed, pride, or fashion, remaining virtuous requires discipline, courage, and awareness. Stoic practice teaches that we can maintain inner resilience through daily reflection, pauses before reaction, and the distinction between what is within our power and what is not. It teaches us to see value in simple actions, in serving others, in caring for ourselves and the world, regardless of whether society acknowledges it. Epictetus remained true to his principles even as a slave, and his freedom was expressed through reason and the ability to act virtuously. Seneca remained committed to virtue even in exile, and his happiness was independent of external conditions. Marcus Aurelius remained a virtuous emperor despite pressure, war, and intrigue. These examples teach us that virtue is not an external convention or a dependence on social recognition, but an inner choice, an act of inner freedom and courage. The world may see it as an anomaly, weakness, or naivete, but the Stoics show that it is precisely under such conditions that true human strength is revealed. To be virtuous in a world of madness is an expression of courage, loyalty to oneself and to nature. Stoic wisdom teaches that man is made for reason and virtue, and that preserving these qualities, even amid chaos, is his natural capacity. It is important to remember that external society may be unjust, cynical, or hostile, but this does not diminish the value of virtue. On the contrary, it is in such conditions that its true strength is revealed. The Stoics show us the path to develop inner resilience, to maintain calm and clarity of mind, to remain loyal to virtue and reason. In this lies true freedom, independence from external chaos, the ability to see what is right, to act justly, to preserve inner peace. Even if the whole world has gone mad, a person can remain rational, virtuous, and harmonious. He can be a source of light, stability, and wisdom in a chaotic environment. The Stoics show that inner virtue is not only a personal victory over passions and fears, but also a way to remain resilient and happy amid external madness. It allows one to act gently, confidently, and with clarity without succumbing to pressure, aggression, or cynicism. These lessons are a call to us. We can preserve honesty, compassion, justice, and reason, regardless of how society evaluates these qualities. True strength is revealed in resilience, in calm, in the ability to act virtuously even in unfavorable conditions. The Stoics teach that virtue is not an anomaly. It is the natural path of man, his harmony with nature, the logos, and reason. The world may see virtue as strange, but the practice of Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius shows that it is not only possible, but necessary for inner success, happiness, and harmony. In conditions of chaos, injustice, and external pressure, remaining virtuous means preserving inner freedom, clarity of mind, and moral strength. True virtue is revealed in everyday actions, in the choice to remain honest and just, in the ability to be both brave and gentle. The world around may judge, ignore, or mock, but the inner light remains unshaken, and it is this light that leads to true harmony, happiness, and resilience. The Stoics show that the inner path is more important than external recognition, that living in harmony with nature and reason is the highest goal, and that virtue in a world of madness is the manifestation of true human strength, inner independence, and the ability to maintain harmony despite all external circumstances. The world often perceives virtue as an exception, as strangeness, as weakness. It admires speed, spectacle, power, and external achievements, while honesty, justice, patience, and gentleness seem almost anomalous. But Stoic wisdom asserts the opposite. Virtue is the natural state of man, his harmony with nature and reason, the foundation of inner happiness and sustainable success. Goodness does not require external recognition and does not depend on a noisy environment. It manifests quietly, gently, but steadily, creating inner strength, clarity of mind, and harmony of soul. Epictetus taught to distinguish what is within our power and what is not, and to act in accordance with inner reason. Seneca showed that happiness is possible even in exile, when external circumstances limit freedom, and that inner virtue remains a source of strength and joy. Marcus Aurelius, standing at the head of an empire and facing war, intrigue, and pressure, remained true to himself, his reason, and his principles. These examples demonstrate that society's external opinion cannot make virtue a weakness. On the contrary, true strength is revealed precisely when a person maintains clarity, justice, courage, and virtue in a world that often values the opposite. Goodness is not passivity or surrender. It is an active choice, a manifestation of inner freedom and strength, the ability to act consciously, gently, yet firmly. It gives rise to lasting happiness, inner success, and harmony that are not subject to external chaos. To live virtuously means not to wait for society's approval, not to conform to noise, haste, or pressure, but to act in harmony with nature, reason, and one's own values. Every moment in which we preserve virtue despite external circumstances strengthens the inner light, makes us stronger and more resilient, and opens the path to harmony, clarity, and peace. Stoic practice teaches, goodness is natural and evil is a distortion of human nature, a consequence of passions, fears, and societal pressure. A wise person remains true to his nature even when the world around acts in opposition. Thus, virtue becomes not an anomaly, but a norm, a natural state to which we must return again and again. It forms the foundation for all actions, decisions, and interactions, creating space for gentle success and inner happiness. Today, right now, you can make the choice to live in harmony with yourself and nature, to develop inner resilience, to show honesty, justice, compassion, and wisdom. Not to wait for external approval, but to build inner light, clarity, and strength. Goodness is the norm, the natural path of man, his inner freedom and resilience. By accepting this, you begin to act with harmony, joy, and confidence. And regardless of how society evaluates it, your decisions will be wise, your actions effective, and your life filled with meaning and inner happiness.